Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Octant Community Meeting. Today is July 8th, 2020, and we're going to talk about some upcoming fun stuff in the new releases coming up. So let me share my screen so you all can see. There we go, and done. All right, Wayne.
Yeah, thanks. So yeah, today we're going to cover the upcoming release, talk about some of the continued efforts we've been working on, and then just go into a little bit about what might be coming up. And then there's some Q&A around this meeting and the agenda and things like that. So get started with the upcoming release. So we've got some really neat features coming up. We were thinking about doing a release this week, or actually we were thinking about doing it last week, but we kind of wanted to wait and hold up for these features that are listed here. All of them are in flight right now and or merged or about to be merged. So they shouldn't hold up things for too long, but the create resource or apply YAML, that's a feature that people have been asking for a while. So we're getting just kind of the first iteration of that in place. It'll be a very simple modal. You paste YAML, you hit apply, or whatever it is, and things happen, and off it goes into your cluster. So Scott is currently doing that work now, and so that'll be part of the next release. The start without a kubeconfig work that Sam has been working on is just about ready. There's a final pass for a review that's going to be happening today. And I believe that all that work is now ready to be merged. So it's a really nice one that Sam put together, where you can paste in a kubeconfig directly into a dialog, or while Octant's running, it'll watch for your kubeconfig to be set on the command line, which is really nice because now you can have a workflow where you start Octant, and then while Octant is running, you go and create your minikube, or you do a set of commands with like gcloud that maybe installs a kubeconfig. And when that happens, Octant will see that and then refresh, and you'll be viewing your cluster. So it's a nice kind of workflow change that hasn't existed in Octant before. But the other nice thing about this is that now it enables us to really start focus on getting the Electron application as the primary viewer for the Octant UI. The benefit there is that we are no longer bound to the things that individual browsers can and cannot do. We also get access to a full, for those who aren't familiar with Electron, it's basically Node.js and Chromium mashed together to give you a native runtime for a JavaScript type application. So we'll be using that. We have a branch, or we have a feature now that's merged into master where you can build and run that. When this lands, this start without a kubeconfig lands, that'll actually be a lot more usable, because you'll actually be able to start the application and see a UI without it just failing with no, right now it just fails and it doesn't tell you why, or make it easy to figure out why. It just fails because you don't have a kubeconfig. So not very friendly. This fixes all of that, which is really nice. The port forward to service, this is something that came up very early on. It was just one of those things that just kind of needed to be done. We have a group of folks who are currently working on that issue right now. There's a branch, it works. They're just writing some tests and fleshing out some of the finer details on it, but that'll be in this next release as well. Another thing that Sam worked on was the ALB Ingress support. This is specific around a bug that was opened when you use annotation as your, I believe as your, was it the port or the name or something, and then the target is the actual port is like SSL redirect. And anyway, the Amazon has a dialect that where it'll go and it'll read this HTTPS configuration from the annotation on the Ingress, and then it will use that to forward your requests and do the SSL redirect. So this was failing in Octant, causing just the whole thing not to render at all. So we fixed that, but we also took that information and moved it up into the config section. So when you're looking at the Ingress, you'll see that it is using annotation, but then you also see the configuration that's in that annotation. So that's a nice little extra that we put in there. And then finally, just the ability to kind of delete namespaces without having to go into the namespace listing, then click on the individual namespace, and then go and hit delete. Now you can just, right from the grid, from the list of namespaces, there's a grid action similar to how we have for other resources. You can just select delete. So those are all things that will be coming up in the next release. Is there anything that I forgot or anything that someone wants to add before I move on to the continued efforts? Great. So the continued efforts. So this is all stuff that's been being worked on and has been in flight for a while. I just wanted to touch on it again to kind of give an update of where they're at. So the viewing RBAC permissions are essentially the can I view that might have that within Octant. That is something that I've been working on and going back and forth on for the last couple releases. And what we've decided is that we're going to build out the can I view under the cluster module. And then once we have that built out, we'll then take that and leverage the permissions that we've collected with our HasAccess subject access refactoring. So originally I was trying to kind of do those HasAccess subject access refactorings first. And then I was going to map them into the can I view. I got a little stuck in some places and wasn't able to really flesh that idea out fully because it was trying to do too much at once. So I took a step back from it and decided that we'll implement the can I view, which will give us all of the kind of core pieces we need to then start to incrementally move forward with refactoring our HasAccess. The goal there is to remove that spamming of the API when we don't have access to resources. We're able to just kind of accept the fact that we don't have access to it and refresh on a timer the access that we have, and then also provide some user actions to manually refresh and attempt to reconnect and get a new set of permissions. So the resource viewer work that Milan has been doing, that's been progressing forward. Milan, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
I don't think so. Yeah, it's coming along nicely, a little slower than I expected, but we're getting there. I'm hoping that it will be part of the next release. At this point, it's just making sure that it works for as many possible configurations as we can get to test with. So there's still a little bit of testing left and applying the final design that we're still working on.
Okay, great. So yeah, so that we're hoping for next release on that, but we're also not going to rush it. The whole point of redoing the resource viewer was to make an improvement and make an enhancement to the existing one, not just you know, put a new style on it. So we're really working hard on that to make sure that we're adding some, like, enriching the existing resource viewer and making it something that provides higher value than the current one does. And I think we're doing that. So keep an eye out for that. I'm sure we'll have some more demos as that progresses. And then one of the things that has also been being worked on recently that I've shown a couple of times now is the plugin system. I finally appropriately made an issue for it because I had been slacking in doing that. So 1080 is the issue for kind of prototyping the JavaScript TypeScript plugin system. The goal here is we're going to create it won't be full featured, but it will do the baseline of what our plugins do now, and we'll provide some scaffolding and some documentation around how to get started using it. And then we're going to release it under experimental feature flag, or it might not even need to be under a feature flag. It'll basically just be released experimental, use at your own risk, but please use it so we can get feedback on it. It will exist alongside the existing Go plugin system. That won't be changing at all for the time being. And these two things will live side by side, and we'll use it to kind of drive the shape and design of the plugin system as we try to make it so that plugins can easily be shipped out to various platforms, but they're also easy to create and easy to get started with. Just reducing any friction around plugin installation and running and things like that, and creation itself. So that work will land at some point in master, but we'll be doing demos and talking about it as it progresses, just like we have been. Did I miss anything on the? Oh, you know what? I did miss something. Documentation. So we talked last week about the reference.octant.dev, and we have released that. All of that's merged and pushed out and is current now. But what we're going to be doing is I opened an issue is we're going to be taking the plugin documentation, and we're going to be that one, the docs page. So there's this ReaViz.io tool, which they use Storybook very well. And what they do is they actually have created a whole docs section that you land on when you first go into the Storybook. And it has the getting started and all of these things that we can really, if we move our plugin documentation into here, not only can we have it alongside all of the component documentation, but it can be a more feature-rich experience by being able to have a tutorial for building a plugin that includes the actual visualizations that you're going to be creating using the code that you're actually going to be copying and pasting to do that. So as you walk through the docs, you'll be getting this guided UI experience of building a plugin that will map directly to what you're going to see in Octant. It's a pretty neat way to use Storybook. And so fortunately they've done the groundwork for us. So I created an issue that linked to their two repos, or the two entries in their repo that kind of make this happen within Storybook. And we're going to be, this is part of the continued effort around building out better docs for people. We know right now that we have some pretty large gaps, and as things have moved and updated, we haven't done so well of keeping those things updated. And the whole Storybook initiative was a big part of making sure that keeping our docs up to date and presenting them in a useful way was a priority for us. And so that's where the motivation for all this came from, and that's what you can expect to see from our Storybook, is a very similar experience to what ReaViz does. All right, anything you want to add there? Great. I'll move on to kind of upcoming. So we are, after this next release, we're going to be planning our sprint out. And I think the theme you're going to see coming out of this next sprint is going to be around visualization and more components. There's some work happening to kind of spec out the idea for a structured log viewer. Milan is looking at this right now. There's some issues open to add more of the Clarity components. We've always known that getting kind of parity, if you will, with the set of Clarity components is something that we would eventually strive for. But adding in things like the wizard component and the timeline component are going to extend the ability of plugin authors to really create unique experiences within Octant that will really allow you to kind of capture input from users and perform actions on those inputs in a way that currently you kind of have to roll these big long like input form type style wizards yourself, and this will alleviate a lot of that setup. And then we're also thinking about how can we visualize popular tools, especially tools that have like lots of events and workflows in Octant, thinking about like knative and tekton. We want to be able to take the output of some of these common things that people use and show them in a way that's helpful surface all of that in a way that is that helps drive understanding about what these things are doing and how they're all connected. There currently is an experimental Tekton plugin that was written, I'll link it right now. It was written a few months back. I have not personally used it yet, but we will be reaching out and talking to them as we get more into kind of developing and thinking about how we want to approach that. So I'm trying to think of anything. Oh, and you know, I did miss something on the upcoming, which is more electron app focus. So now, as I mentioned previously, with the upcoming release being able to do things without a kubeconfig, we'll probably put some more focus on the electron app and get that to a point where it can become the kind of default viewer for Octant. And I think that's it. Does anyone have anything they want to add to that?
I was just going to add for the wizard and the timeline component, you also look into the stepper component as well, if it's not already in there. From like a design side of things, like the design team at VMware that uses Clarity, it's kind of like the preferred out of those three, the kind of the preferred one. I mean, they all have like their use cases, but they're all kind of similar, but that one's pretty good.
Cool, awesome, thank you. All right, so I'll move into the open Q&A section. This first one is one I put in. So we were talking about, Jonas brought up a point that hackmd IO documents have a character limit, and that eventually we will run up into that character limit at some point. One of the other, another open source project that Jonas is involved with, Valero, has done that exact thing. So we are, I think what we're likely going to start doing is when the video lands in YouTube, which is currently a manual process, we will take the agenda for that video and put it into our GitHub repo with a link to the video, and then remove the actual notes from this document and provide a link to that entry in our repo, as a way to allow people to easily comment and add things for the current meeting as well as future meetings, but then still have a history of all of this information around agendas and the videos. I think when you watch the video and you have an agenda to go with it, it's a little more cohesive and makes more sense. So having the video and the agenda tied together in some form in our GitHub repo for all of our community meetings, I think will be very useful for people who are going through and catching up. I was actually surprised when I talked to somebody who was like, yeah, I've been going through the community meetings. And I was like, oh, that's awesome. That's great. That's what they're there for. So it's, so I think that's our plan. Does anyone have any opinions on that, or does that sound good to folks?
I can provide some feedback there. So what we did for the other open source project was that we continued to use the current hackmd. We just copied everything over to another one that we called archive. It's a kludgy way. It works. We didn't have to update any links. People who had bookmarked the previous community meeting notes still get to them. For that project, we actually used to do notes. We used to add the meeting notes to a community repo before for the project. We skipped that and instead just did hackmd. For another project that I managed, we used the wiki, so the GitHub wiki as the agenda. That works too. So there are a bunch of different variants that you can use here. So yeah,
I like the idea
though,
of it being
having it live like this is great. So having it in one place first where people can add things, I think it makes sense.
Yeah, I really like the idea of it going into the wiki. And also part of my reason for wanting to use this was we didn't have to change any links. So if we just take the info that's here and migrate it to the wiki, yeah, I guess it means that anyone who's linked directly to one of the headings in this agenda those links would break.
I think that would be rare.
Yeah, I do too. So, okay. Yeah, I think I like that. Adding them to the wiki.
It's
Yeah.
an easy one, and then you don't have to do a bunch of PRs just for meeting notes as well. And if something's misspelled, you can just go in and fix it as well.
Cool. Great. All right. Any other questions, comments, anything before we call it? All right. Well, as always, thank you, everybody.
Have a fantastic week, rest of the week, everyone. Bye.